Speedrunning Mizutsune was the most recent personal challenge I undertook, and it was pretty dang fun. I wanted to share some of the things I learned and give some advice for those of you who are looking to take on a run. It's still possible that the demo gets updated in the near future, but even if it doesn't, I thought I'd try to fully break down the speedrun anyway. I'll be separating the hunts into different segments. If you're only interested in hearing about certain aspects of the run, there should be some timestamps on the bar and in the description. Let's get started by talking about preparing. Normally there's a lot more to plan out and do before a hunt, such as set building, item selection and sorting, and food skill rolling. However, hunts in the demo or in an arena tend to come with a preset item and equipment loadout, so getting set up is much faster. There are a few items you can take from the box of the tent, which may be helpful for you, especially early on when you're still learning to fight the monster. I wanted to do a run without using traps, and I'm not sure any of the items in the tenter box would have saved me more time than they would have taken to grab, so in most of my runs I just boosted with a Palamute right from the get-go. Before I even began hunting though, I set up my radial menu and made some adjustments to the settings. Here's some footage of me setting things up in a training quest. Everything is based on personal preference, but keep in mind that you'll have to grab all the endemic life you want to put on the radial menu at least once before they can be assigned to it. I'll talk more about endemic life in the next part. These settings do get reset if I close the demo, but I don't need to fix them at the start of every hunt. So that should cover everything that happens before I start to leave the camp. The next part of any run is pathing, where you make your way to the monster you want to fight. Some monsters like Mizutsune can spawn in multiple areas. He tends to spawn in 6, 10, and 13. Rise is a bit different than other Monster Hunter games, because it not only marks the location of creatures, but it also has a variety of buffs and endemic life along the way. I would recommend planning a route for each possible spawning location, that way you don't have to reset as much. While it does take longer to reach the areas further away from camp, they won't make or break your run if you aren't trying to get a world record. If you really don't want to go to those areas, especially if you have a strategy that only works in one area, then feel free to abandon until you get the spawn you want. Talking specifically about Mizutsune, I'll cover each of the areas it can spawn, and my thought process behind choosing the routes I took. Area 6. When Mizu spawns at 6, I like to take the Palamute through 1 and 4. It's easily the most direct route, and has a surprising amount of endemic life. There are pepper sects along the way in 1, which could be helpful for bow and dual blade users, as well as a couple Spirit Birds. There's also an Antidobra I used to pick up by the waterfall, which will both cure you and temporarily make you immune to Bubble Blight. I did stop using both cleansers and Antidobras once I got used to using Bubble Blight to my advantage, but if you're just learning Mizutsune for the first time, they're pretty nice. Once you're in Area 6, there's a wire bug to the bottom right, as well as a butterflame in the middle. There are a few alternate routes. You can run directly west from camp through a cave. It has similar endemic life along the way, but you have to climb up the waterfall in Area 2, which felt a bit slower to me. Otherwise, TSC had an interesting route that used the Great Wire Bug to move across the mountain between 1 and 2, where he could grab a stink mink to lure, as well as either blast toads or the fire beetle. He and a number of other speedrunners also used the Great Wire Bug north of the waterfall in 2 to grab both another wire bug and a puppet spider. I didn't want to use the puppet spider in my runs, so I opted out of that route. Area 10. If Mizutsune spawns in Area 10, the most direct route seems to be going through 1, 4, 6, and 8, though you could bait it away with a stink mink or whale nard and have it turf war. I didn't like running that route as much. It has a decent number of Spirit Birds, but I found a route that I liked more. If you take a slight detour through 1, 3, 7, and 9, you'll be able to pick up a Butterflame and a Thunder Beetle. Be careful when crossing Rathian in 7, you'll want to use your boost to get past her. I found she aggroed far more often when I ran under her tail than in front of her face. Either way, it's not a huge time loss, but you can see even Team Darkside struggles to evade her roar. Once you're past that, I usually like taking the Butterflame to the left of the door in 9, then the Beetle across the bridge, saving the one between 9 and 10 just in case Mizu zones from 10 to 9. Once you're in 10, there's a wire bug to the south of the middle and a mud beetle to the west. I'll be explaining the significance of the beetles a bit later on, but in my opinion, they are worth a small amount of time to grab. Area 13. Area 13 is definitely the furthest, and I use the same path I do for 10, but instead of running directly west, I run northwest of 9. You can also do a route through 1, 4, and 6, which has a ton of speary birds and a poison toad, but has a pretty annoying waterfall to climb. The Palamute tends to fall or bug out in the demo. When you get up to 13, you have a pretty wide arsenal. The wirebug is to the south, as well as flash flies, and a vigor wasp to the north. There are also bomb badgies in the middle, who can pack quite a punch if you can get them to blow up before they disappear. No matter which area you path to, I have a few recommendations. First, I recommend grabbing the wirebugs that are closest to the creature first. That way you can make full use of their duration, but you also won't end up in a position where the monster leaves to another area, but in the next area you're left without a new wirebug. It did make a pretty substantial difference on a few runs that could have been great. Second, remember that you can eat, heal, and sharpen on the dog, at the cost of being slightly slower than boosting. You can also jump with a dog to cancel a boost or part of the item animation. If you use an item while falling off a waterfall or ledge on a Palamute, you'll hit the ground faster than you would otherwise. Lastly, if your weapon can make use of the attack and stamina speary birds, I recommend watching Gaijin Hunter's video on where to get them. The Gunlance has a lot of fixed damage and doesn't care as much about stamina, so I didn't go out of my way to path for the perma buffers. Keep in mind I haven't really timed things out, so I'm not entirely sure what the most efficient strategy is. Again, I was mostly doing this as a personal challenge rather than being 100% optimal. The other part of your hunts that should be pretty consistent is your opening. Basically when you've gotten your wirebugs and buffs ready, but the monster hasn't noticed you. For the most part, you want to be in a position where you can get a large amount of damage in a quick burst. Then be prepared to heavy armor, evade, or counter the roar quickly, while also being prepared for whatever attack comes after the roar. There are a small number of things that can go wrong. Sometimes I'd forget to jump off or dismount the Palamute, mistime the roar, end up being too close or too far, or one of my companions either caught its attention early or was the target of the roar, making the monster move differently than expected. Those mishaps don't completely ruin the run, but I recommend developing some sort of consistent approach, because this is one of the windows where the monster is the most predictable. In my runs, I learned that I could open with an aerial full burst, which would usually cause Mizutsune to jump from left to right, at which point I would get in position, then counter the roar with guard edge and a stake. I also noticed that if I stood a little further away, it tended to go for a spin that could be blocked with Wyvern's Fire, but it wasn't guaranteed. Once I got a solid opening down, it was easier to predict when Mizutsune would enrage or when its head would break. From here on out, I'll mostly be talking about what I learned about Mizutsune's behavior specifically, and what sorts of things helped me deal with some of his mechanics. If you're looking to speedrun another monster, these things might not be as applicable for you. But in any fight, you should keep experimenting and learning what you can and can't get away with. Also, don't be too discouraged if you're getting hit early on. With the addition of Wirefall, getting hit in Rise isn't nearly as big of a time loss as it is in other MH titles. You have to be willing to faint and fail plenty of times in order to get better. That being said, you should still try to learn what the monster is doing at any given point, and how to attack it safely. Anyway, Mizu slips and slides around a lot more than it used to, meaning it can create and close distances a lot more often. One thing that took me a while to learn was to keep a wirebug or two available for the moments when it moved really far away, or to respond if it pulls a quick U-turn. At first, I burned most of my wirebugs right when they came off a cooldown. They're definitely flashy and cool, but if you use them too quickly, you won't have those options in the moments you need them the most. On top of that, I learned that the wirebug actions do not have the same cooldowns. The ones used for movement with your weapon put away are typically shorter than the other wirebug arts. So sometimes it's better to sheath your weapon instead of always having it out. I'm definitely still learning to space the wirebug, as well as the arts and mid-air attacks. There's a surprising amount of depth to it. Something I started doing after the 731 run that made the hunt a lot more fun was figuring out how the new Severe Bubble Blight works, and dropping the Anti-Dobra. Severe Bubble Blight seemed like a huge inconvenience. It increases the time it takes your hunter to respond after dodging or sprinting, and makes your hunter drift further in a direction if you've built momentum. However, the added mobility is actually really beneficial for repositioning quickly without wirebugs when Mizutsune drifts after being knocked over. Getting used to how far you drift can help you close gaps even faster with your weapon unsheathed, and allows you to stay mobile even while performing attacks. If you need better control, you can still use the wirebug movement, so it just opens up more mobility options. We're not going to cover all the attacks. That would be a bit much, even for me. But Mizu tends to have some behaviors which might be helpful to know. After enraging, Mizutsune likes to surround itself with bubbles. It's a good opening to hit the head. The bubbles will interrupt you if you haven't started an attack, but otherwise they don't do much damage. It can do the bubble bath without roaring first, but you should expect it at least once after it enters its rage mode. This move is pretty important to pay attention to because of the windows it creates. Mizu also has some consistent patterns with his beams. From what I can tell, he will always follow up the vertical beam with a horizontal one, unless it gets flinched out of it. Even if you dodge both and get close, be careful, he tends to do a big water blast as a finisher. Before Mizutsune zones, it usually sits still and taunts. It can be flinched, lured with a stink mink, trapped, mounted, and can be enraged before it leaves. If it does enrage, it will typically do the bubble bath as soon as it gets to the next area. While those tendencies are helpful to know, you might be wondering when it's safe to get damage in. The bubble bath is not only a safe window to attack the head, it also tenderizes his hide and seems to give you a damage boost if you break the red bubbles. On top of that, after the move, you basically get 2 free knockdowns if you manage to do enough damage to its weakened hit zones. Mizu will slip around after being knocked over, so be ready to chase it, or come up with some clever positioning to keep the damage up. Another opportunity you should know about is that Mizutsune has a longer knockdown if you flinch it while it's airborne. It's incredibly hard to pull off, but if you do, it'll stay on the ground nearly twice as long as usual. With all that said, you'll inevitably have to take some risks while fighting it to cause the knockdowns. As I was learning the fight, I noticed a lot of its attacks left its head in specific positions, so I could prep for where the head would end up afterwards while it attacked. On top of that, some moves like the water beams and blasts have small little taunts that follow them, so they're pretty generous windows to attack. I mentioned earlier that for areas 10 and 13, I would grab the Thunder Beetle, which can cause a KO. The beetle can really help keep the monster locked down after I've already used the 2 free knockdowns from the bubble bath. On top of that, it seems like there is a bug in the demo where Felvine will reuse the last item you used, meaning you can get 2 Thunder Beetle stuns off, which really lets you lock down Mizu. I was experimenting around with it in the last day of speedrunning. If you don't want to exploit that mechanic, you can always just use the Felvine to get your cat enraged before you use items. Well, that's about all I've got for general Mizutsune tips. From here on out, I'll be talking about the things I've learned about the Gunlance and Rise. First off, at least in the demo, learning how to use the quick stake is really important. The stake does an absurd amount of damage and doesn't burn through sharpness in the same way it did in World. The speed of the quick stake might not seem all that different, but it is far easier and safer to quick stake than it is to use it regularly. Don't get me wrong, the heavy combo is still good during knockdowns, but otherwise, learning the spacing and timing for the quick stake made a world of difference in my runs. The counter is also an incredibly important tool. It comes out very quickly after almost all of your attacks, but there are some things you should still be guarding. The counter isn't active for very long, and only blocks the first hit. On top of that, it can't be chained in the same way as Adept Guard. So, multi-hit moves like Mizutsune's Double Bite are better off blocked. I don't recommend spamming it. Save the counter for moments when you want to bail out your aggressive plays or punish certain moves. You've still got a lot of options out of it, including the quick stake, but you don't need to use them right away afterwards. There is a small period you can hold them, which can make the difference between hitting or missing the stake. Lastly, keep in mind that you don't need to keep the Gunlance unsheathed all the time. If you need to close distances, remember that you can use the wire bugs to really bolster your mobility. The weapon has a lot of options in the air, each of them has their own situational strengths, so keep playing around with them. So, future alpha here. The second part of the demo has dropped, and as usual, this video didn't quite make it out as fast as I would have liked. I wish you all the best of luck on your own personal challenges. I gotta get some other videos done. See you all later.